What's cracking YouTube? Welcome back to the channel and thank you all for tuning in. It's your boy Matty B, and today we're going to do a little preview for round 2 of the Super Motocross World Championship playoffs. And as always, we'll get into a few relevant topics in the sport as well as get into our preview action for this weekend in St. Louis. But we'll start out with one of the hottest topics in the sport right now, and that being the cancellation of the second motos in Charlotte. Got tons of rain, the track was in ruins, but that wasn't quite the problem that forced the cancellation. So could they have raced? And what could be done for the fans? You know they wanted to see a second moto. Then, we'll talk about both of our winners from Charlotte. The new boss is the same as the old boss. Hayden Deegan and Jett continue their domination. And could that be bad for the sport? None of us want to show up on Saturday and know who's going to win before the gate even drops. And then, I would say hopefully this is the last time I'm going to get into this topic, but I'm sure it won't be. But with Jorge Prado's departure from Monster Energy Kawasaki becoming more evident by the day, who do they pick up to replace him? And then, in some unfortunate bad news, we've got an injury report from round 1 in Charlotte. The track was Gnarls Barkley, and it claimed some victims. And I was there in person to get some content for round 1 at Charlotte, but will not be in St. Louis. But shout out to this man, Marshall Welton. He's going to help us get some content when we're not even there. And last but not least, my favorite part of the video every week, the track preview and breakdown for round 2 of the Super Motocross World Championship playoffs in St. Louis this weekend. And at the very end, you know we won't forget about the predictions. I'll let you know what I think is going to go down this weekend in St. Louis. But before I get into all that, y'all know the drill. Got to give a huge thank you and a shout out to my channel sponsors. Thank you to ASV Inventions and thank you to Sirius Studio. If you're a squid and tip over all the time and need an unbreakable lever, or if you just want to look cool and get some merch that's repped by myself, Trey Kennard, and more, then check out my video description for more info and discount codes. And remember, if you're supporting them, you're supporting me. Let's get into the video. Alright, to start off, we'll get into what everybody's been super fired up about, and that is the cancellation of the second motos at Charlotte. And I know I've got pictures in the background showcasing the absolute ruins that the track was left in after the storm, but that wasn't the real problem. It was the Lightning National. I was there was definitely lightning, and that can get pretty sketch when all the fans are in a set of metal grandstands. Not sure if you guys have realized it or not, but we kind of live in the land of the free and the home of the lawsuit, so yeah, kind of a big liability, and you can't really just do that and race through lightning. And I've heard a lot of people have the argument of, oh, who's ever gotten struck by lightning? It's such a small chance and this and that. Well, if you didn't know this, a kid actually did get struck by lightning during a race last year in Texas. He managed to live to tell the tale, but a super scary situation and definitely not one that anybody's going to try to recreate. So that right there is the main reason that they had to delay the racing. If it had just rained with no lightning, I'm pretty sure they would have just sent it. I mean, after all, the ticket says rain or shine and nobody has a choice. But lightning is what threw a wrench in everybody's program. After every lightning strike within a certain amount of miles away from the venue, they had to do a 30-minute hold each time. And after that happened a few different times and you had to wait 30 minutes each time, eventually we got to the point where it was getting late. They had gotten much more rain than forecasted and the track was a total disaster. And from listening to some interviews earlier this week, it sounds like they had some contingency plans in place. I heard thoughts of shortening the motos, cutting out the outdoor section, and just doing whatever they needed to do to give the fans something. But even though they had plans in place, time started running out, it started getting dark, and apparently none of those plans could come to fruition and they had to call it. And as far as the conditions go, could they have raced anyway? Honestly, yeah, they could have. Would it have been a total disaster? Yeah, probably, but we've seen those before. They're in the contract sometimes. But on the other hand, it's got to be hard to make the decision to send everybody out there whenever almost all the teams and riders are saying they'd be okay with a one-moto format. There were a few that wanted to race. We heard from Hayden Deegan, and apparently Tomac wanted a Moto 2 as well, but it sounds like the overwhelming majority had agreed to call it. And the last factor at play here, or at least the last one that I know about, is the fact that they did not have sufficient lighting to run the race at night. And this one's actually really surprising to me because we're at a dragway. I thought they already had lights. Apparently they did not have extra lighting, which also is a bit of a surprise to me, but apparently that stuff is crazy expensive and there's a small chance of needing it. But with this being the playoffs and the World Championship and they're trying to push this as the biggest series, not a great look to not have a backup and not be able to run Moto 2. But I'm also not quite willing to burn them at the stake for this because apparently the riders and the teams agreed. And the biggest losers in all of this are of course the fans. They got gypped and they're not happy. And on top of that, SMX Next didn't even get to race. They lined up on the gate just to get pulled off of it. Luckily for them, I think they're getting the best solution they could possibly get, with that being running a makeup main event this weekend in St. Louis to make up for the one they missed in Charlotte. And these are just amateurs. They don't have the unlimited budgets as the top teams and the pros do. So I can't even imagine the financial hardship of trying to get a destroyed dirt bike together in 6 days to race again the next weekend. Not ideal, so I think the SMX Next kids got the next best thing. And as for the fans, I really do feel bad for y'all, especially if you weren't there for the entire weekend. I think we all know nobody's getting a refund, but I saw somebody else mention this earlier in the week that maybe they could offer a discount code or something of that nature to all the people that attended. That way they could attend a Supercross next year at a little bit of a cheaper rate, and I think it would be a small gesture but would go a long way to the fans. Alright, enough about all that. Let's get into the races that did run last weekend in Charlotte. And what do you know? Hayden Deegan and Jett Lawrence resumed domination just like last year and just like the year before. Actually, Deegan didn't necessarily dominate in year one, but he still won the championship, and that'll tie into the point that I'm trying to make here. But coming into Charlotte, Jett and Deegan were clearly the two favorites. They're the only two champions that the series has ever seen. So with that being said, my question for you all is this bad for the sport? Like I said earlier, nobody wants to show up and know who's going to win before the gate even drops. And if Jett and Deegan continue their domination, that'll be 3 years out of 3 that both classes have seen the same champion. And luckily, Deegan's moving to the 450 class next year, but you just don't want to get around to the playoffs every year and think that you already know who's going to win coming into them. So is this exciting for the sport? No, not really. But is it bad for the sport? I'm going to have to go with a no on that one too. Dominant riders like Hayden Deegan and Jett Lawrence are actually more of an asset to the sport than anything. As demonstrated by Deegan going on Fox and Friends and Jett going to whatever that stupid gala thing was, dominant athletes have a huge potential to grow the sport that they're participating in. And that's what these two are, and on top of all that, we're going to get a matchup between the two of them as early as next year. So as far as Jett Lawrence and Hayden Deegan go, definitely not bad for the sport, but maybe bad for the excitement of the sport at the top of the field. I just hope we don't see it get too out of hand and we get to continue to see some challengers. As for this series, in the 450 class, I'm thinking Jett's biggest challenger will be Chase Sexton. And at the opener in Charlotte, he qualified better than Jett. He got a better start than Jett, but he blew it in the first corner. And then he had a great comeback ride to get the runner-up spot behind Jett Lawrence. So he's got a bit of a points gap to make up, but I think he's going to be really good in St. Louis this weekend. And down to the final checkered flag, as long as he finishes the series this time, I think this is Jett Lawrence's biggest problem. Then in the 250 class, I'm definitely thinking this thing comes down to Deegan and Joe Sushi Wasabi Shimoda. We saw some great speed out of Hammaker, but I think he's still dealing with some health issues that'll keep him from charging to the end of the moto. But Sushi has proven that he can run with Deegan, he can beat Deegan, and he's definitely not scared of Deegan. And at the opener in Charlotte, if he had just been a little bit more patient and avoided that crash with Hammaker, then I'm thinking he gets a sure win. He was 2.5 seconds a lap faster than Deegan on his best lap, and I know Sushi's trying to bring this thing down to the wire. Moving on to some hypothetical nationals, we all know the story of Jorge Prado, comes to America, doesn't like his bike, quits again, then gives up, and now it looks like he's out at Kawasaki. And I don't really feel like wasting any more of my breath on that guy, but my question for today is, who gets his spot at Kawasaki? Initially, Jorge was locked down for a 3-year deal, so I think it's safe to say that Kawasaki had not planned for this. And who remembers this guy? El Hombre, Jason Anderson. This is who they pushed out to keep Jorge around, and in hindsight, are they wishing that they still had Jason? If I were Kawasaki, I know I would. At least Jason actually tried out there. And then there's Tom Vial, who's headed back across the pond for next year to ride for HRC Honda in the MXGP class. And he's already signed, sealed, and delivered, so that's not going to change. But had he waited it out a little bit longer, or if Jorge had quit a little bit earlier, maybe Tom Vial could have slid into this second spot at Kawi. He's really good friends with their new incoming rider, Chase Sexton. Would have been a great fit, but it ain't going to happen. Now, we'll get into my 2 picks for who I think Kawasaki should hire to replace Jorge Prado. And for number 1, I'm going with the Swiss legend, Valentin Guillot. The dude can ride Supercross. I saw it last week. He was great all summer on pretty much a stock Yamaha. He didn't even get the suspension oil changed for almost the whole season. If Kawasaki wants the absolute polar opposite of Jorge Prado, then look no further than Valentin Guillot. And my other pick, who I actually think is a better pick, is Garrett Marchbanks. Measuring in at 6'12", and I don't even know how many pounds, the dude is a massive unit on a 250F, and he would thrive on a 450. He just signed to ride the 250 class again next year for Mitch Payton's Pro Circuit Kawasaki team. But the 450 team, it's still Kawasaki. I'm sure they could work it out. And if they really want to see what Garrett Marchbanks has in the tank, put him on the 450. He'll bark. Now into some unfortunate news. We've got an injury report from round 1 in Charlotte. First off, we lost two Jules Beaumer to a massive, super gnarly, and super scary crash. I believe it was a burst fracture to a few vertebrae in his back. Not a good injury, but prayers up to two Jews, and hopefully he'll make a full recovery and we'll see him back at full force sometime next year. Man, this one's a bummer. The dude made it through 28 regular season races with no injuries and made every single race, but then on Friday practice in Charlotte, Malcolm Stewart OJ'd a jump and kinked up his back and was out for the weekend. Not sure if we're getting him back in St. Louis or not, but I sure hope so. And last but not least, we already talked about him, but Garrett Marchbanks went out with a huge crash in Moto 1 last weekend. I say Moto 1, but I guess that's kind of the only moto that ran, but I think it was an ankle injury or something like that for Garrett. But I believe his plans are to try to line up and grit it out this weekend in St. Louis. And those guys may or may not be in action, but this guy will definitely be in action, and that is the 35 of Marshall Welton. And I gotta throw a shout out to Marsh because not only is he the ultimate privateer grinder, but he also ran the GoPro for me last weekend in Charlotte, but I jacked up the settings and totally botched it. So to try to make up for it, this was actually Marshall's idea, but I overnight mailed my GoPro setup to him so he can use it this weekend in St. Louis. Legendary idea, and a thank you to Marsh. Now we're gonna get some content for you guys from St. Louis when we're not even there. I've got some stuff that I signed up to help with around the house this weekend, so no St. Louis for me, but I just booked my trip to Vegas and will be in the cut, no choice. And last but not least, we've got a track preview, track breakdown, whatever you want to call it, for round 2 this weekend in St. Louis. And this is an interesting one. We're used to the drag strips, but this one's in a stadium. And originally, I believe you were supposed to go out to the exhibition hall and do several sections out there. But now, I think it's been decided upon that you're just going to go out, make a sand U-turn, and then come straight back in. But overall, the track is looking super hybrid and super unique. Let's get into it. To start off, we got about a medium length start straight right in the middle of the stadium into a left-handed flat 180. And then exiting turn 1, you got a little set of outdoor rollers into then a supercross bowl corner. And just like Charlotte, this track has one supercross rhythm section, and that's where we're at right now. I'm thinking the fast line is going to be 3 onto the tabletop, and then step off again, and then triple single out, maybe even a quad into the sand sweeper. If you can't get the 3 onto the tabletop right out of the corner, then an alternate line could be double in, and then over both of the tabletops, and then a 3-2 on the way out. And right out of the rhythm section, you've got your first of 2 sand sweepers, totally throwing the guys in the suspension techs for a loop because the suspension's got to be stiff enough for that rhythm, but soft and plush enough for that sand. Pretty much impossible. But hopefully we'll see some inside and outside lines form. You know it's going to get whooped out, but we got to keep the options open. And out of the sand sweeper, it's Lommel in a stadium because then you got a set of 5 sand rollers, but then Lommel ends immediately because then you're back into a supercross bowl corner to the left. And then out of that corner, it looks to be a pretty big-ass double. Hopefully the face will be a little bit less terrifying than they were in Charlotte. But we're indoors, so no rain. It should only be but so soft. And they were not playing around on the sand with this layout because then we're into our second of 2 sand sweepers. And although this is just the track map, the second sweeper you can definitely visually tell looks rougher and more whooped out than the first one. Just sending the boys through a sweeper of misery into a wall jump. And these wall jumps right before and after the sand sections where you just get sandblasted for 20 minutes plus 1. Always a favorite of the riders. I'm not being sarcastic at all. But you land the wall jump and then there's more sand all the way into the corner, so you'll have to choose if you're going to air it out like Guy Cooper or if you're going to stay low and try to get the power to the ground. But this is going to be a super crucial section to nail. The race could be won and lost just from the area from the big double to the exit of the sand section. But out of the sand, a right-handed bowl corner, and then another big-ass double. This one might even be a bigger-ass double than the other one. But land the big double, and then you got a unique little split section. You can either stay tight and go to the inside, then you got a little pop step up, and then maybe you can double out. Or you can head round the outside with the trailer park girls. A bigger step up on the way out, which will probably give you even more momentum to probably clear that second double, which you might not be able to do from the inside. But out of the option section, then you got to step up over the tunnel, and these things are about the steepest, most vertical jumps you can possibly find. And then, depending on how they build it, this next section could have 2 very distinct options. The first option would be to case the double in, land, and stay tight around the inside and the off camber, and then roll on the way out. Or you can go outside, step on up over that thing, rail the bowl turn at the bottom, and then double back out. Longer distance, but way more speed, and hopefully those 2 options even out so we can see some damn good racing. But out of there, you got a 90 to the right, a little single, and then you're back into where I was talking about the exhibition hall. And apparently, they had bigger plans for this section at first thought, but now it's just going to go out, rip some sand, do a U-turn, and then come right back in. And it appears that the whole thing is sand, so this will probably end up being one of the roughest sections on the track, but then you rip back into the stadium, WFO, and under the tunnel, sweep back across the start straight, and then you've got 2 triples back to back with a right-handed bowl corner in the middle. And these triples, they're called 3-5-3s because the face is a 3-footer, the middle is a 5-footer, and then the landing is also a 3-footer. But depending on how they're built, these could be tough, especially with the angle being a little awkward coming into the first one. But after those 2 triples, then you've got your finish line, maybe the one place on the track to take a nice deep breath, lay in the finish, and cross over the first corner into one last bowl corner. Coming out of this corner, we got a single or a wall jump or something like that, and then we're right back into the rollers that you saw off the start. And that right there, folks, is one lap around round 2 for the Super Motocross playoffs in St. Louis this weekend. I think this is going to be a really tough one on the riders, very unique and lots of sand. And last but certainly not least, let's end the video with my predictions for what I think is going to go down this weekend in St. Louis. And guys, I'm actually feeling kind of frisky this week. I might actually go out on some limbs. In the 250 class, for the win, I'm going to go with Sushi. Joe's been on an amazing run. I think he would have won last weekend without the crash. He had more speed and a better start than Deegan, and if he just doesn't throw it away, then I think St. Louis belongs to Joe. Then for second, I'm going to go with Hayden Deegan. Very hard to not put him at the top because he's won so much lately. But this is going to be a bit of a tighter race, and usually in Supercross, his starts have not quite been what we've seen outdoors. But with that being said, I could pretty easily be talked out of my take of Deegan losing this weekend. And then for the final podium spot, I'm going to go with Seth Hamaker. Awesome ride at Charlotte, but late in the moto, he appears to suffer due to some health issues, so I think he'll be good, just maybe not quite great. And then for the 450s, we're going to continue to go out on limbs because I'm just feeling like being different today. But for the win, I'm going to go with Chase Sexton. Awesome ride for him in Charlotte, and this should be a home race for him. He's awesome on this dirt. You know he's motivated, and I think he takes it to the number 1. Then in second, I'm going to go with Jett Lawrence. Very bold strategy to not pick him to win, but I think Chase has something for him, and we all know that the Hondas are lights out on the start. But this weekend, we're in a stadium, and in the stadiums, they haven't been near as lethal as they are in Pro Motocross. And then for the third spot, I'm going to go with E.T., Eli Tomac. You know he's going to be scooping. You know he's going to be barking. And I think he'll be in the fight again. Hopefully we get another Jett Lawrence versus Eli Tomac versus Chase Sexton scrap. But at the end of the day, I just think the two young guns might have just a little bit more in the tank than old dog E.T. But hopefully I'm wrong. I would love to see Tomac get a win this weekend. But that's all I got for you guys this week. And as always, let me know in the comments if you agree with my takes, if you disagree, if I'm a cooked unit, or if you just want to hate in general. We're here for all of it, and I appreciate you guys watching. That's it for today. Catch you guys next time. No choice.